Welcome, everyone. Uh, Welcome, everyone. Hope you enjoy your lunch. We're going to carry on business while you're eating, so please enjoy your lunch. I'm Jane Waldfogel. It's my pleasure to call this meeting to order and to follow the script that I've been given. So the first thing that I want to do is acknowledge our wonderful Policy Council. So the Policy Council members who are in the audience, could you please stand up for an extremely enthusiastic round of applause? Thank you very much. It's been a fabulous Policy Council. I want to especially acknowledge the people who are now rotating off the council, and I know that that includes Angela Evans, David Johnson, and Matt Stagner. And I especially want to thank them. I think there may be a few others that are rotating off. Scott Allard was making a lot of noise about this yesterday. Then I think there's a few others rotating off, right? Okay, well, though you know who you are, people who are rotating off. Okay, APPAM business. Bob Kessner, who is our wonderful treasurer, is not able to be here for lunch, but he wants you to know that APPAM is ending this year with a projected surplus of $67,000. Woohoo! This is about $69,000 more than we had budgeted, and it's because, really because of the huge popularity of the fall conference, which is just growing by leaps and bounds. Last year was a really big fall conference for us. This year is the biggest we've ever had, so it's just terrific. If you want to reach Bob by email, you can do that. If you have any questions about the finances or about the budget, Bob worked incredibly hard on this, as did Jason Fletcher, who was on the Finance Committee with Bob this year, so we really appreciate both their help. Okay, with my script being out of order, I'm now going to go to the next page that I think is the next page. So this year, APPAM's been changing by leaps and bounds. So a little bit more than 5 years ago, the organization for the first time developed a strategic plan. And this year it was time to review that strategic plan and develop a new one for the coming 5 years. So we had a committee that was led by David Johnson and Kathy Swartz, and a fantastic committee that worked incredibly hard over the last year. And prior to that, Matt Stagner had led a review process that led into that. So it's been really a very intensive effort and has resulted in a new strategic plan for the coming 5 years that the Executive Committee and the Policy Council approved in their day of fun meetings on Wednesday. And so the strategic goals for the next 5 years are to advance the discipline of policy analysis and management. So that's the core of this organization. And then there are 2 other overarching goals, one of which is to increase our policy relevance. We're always concerned about that. And the last is to expand on our diversity. We're always concerned about that. And diversity defined across a variety of spectrums: race, ethnicity, gender, disciplinary orientation, approach, methodologies, international, local, state. So, diversity very broadly defined. So I really want to thank the strategic planning people and encourage all of you to take a look at the strategic plan that they developed. It's posted on the APPAM website. Okay, it's my pleasure now to invite Angela Evans to come up and present the nominating committee report. Oh, okay. There's notes right up here. I think it's a copy. Yeah. Okay. So ballots for voting are going to go out in December by email, and a copy of the slate that was approved by the nominating committee was handed out as people came into the room. So on behalf of Angela, let me thank Angela for leading that committee and thank all the members of the committee for their hard work in putting together a really splendid slate. And with this, I can now open the floor for additional nominations if there are any. Not seeing any. Is there a motion to adopt the nominating committee report? Okay, and a second. The nominating slate, the slate is for President-elect Carolyn Heinrich, now at Vanderbilt, for Vice President Colleen Berry and Mike Shires, for Secretary Kit Carpenter, Matt Stagner, Policy Council for the academic slots, there's 2 openings, Melissa Kearney, Sasha Killawald, Dave Marcotte, Lena Nepomniachtchi, Jenny Owen, Kasali Simon, and David Van Slyke. And for what's called the practitioner slot with 1 opening, Stephen Bell, Steve Juraski, and Ruth Neild. So we have a motion. It was seconded. All in favor of the motion to accept the nominating committee report? Terrific. Any opposed? Okay, so that passes. And so we can now congratulate the newly elected president, Carolyn Heinrich. Carolyn, do you want to stand up and come on? This is the start of standing up and taking a big wave. Ron, she's not going to make a speech because now you are going to come to the podium so that you can thank the people who served on the program committee. And then you're going to introduce Becky, so I'm gone.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay, good. I have 3 tasks. Each of them takes 45 minutes, so please be comfortable and relax. The first thing is I want to thank the program committee. The first thing to say is, without a program committee, we don't have a conference. You wouldn't be enjoying this great lunch or this fabulous entertainment. And this year, they really had a task. There were 2,153 papers submitted, if you can believe that. And we had 15 chairs of the various areas of that we address at APPAM. And the committee just did a great job selecting good papers, appointing chairs and discussants and so forth. We did 2 new things at the fall conference this year, both of which I think are working out pretty well. One of them is that we opened with a symposium lunch on the first day of the conference yesterday, and we had a great lecture, and I had an opportunity to explain the theme of the conference, which I think is a very important thing to do, because I hope some of you took the theme seriously, and there are parts of the conference throughout all 3 days that are directly related to the theme. So that was a very good thing that I had the opportunity to do. The second thing is that we have several activities that are focused on students. If you reflect on this for a minute, I think everybody will understand that the future of APPAM is their students today. So we want to help students. One thing that we did that I really liked, I participated myself, and I urge people to do it in the future, and that is we had a room set up where students could come and discuss their research or their job after they finished their dissertation or their master's degree, and we had no trouble filling the room, probably because Tara threatened a few people, but we had the room full of senior people every hour, and I did it myself, as I said, and it was a delightful experience to meet the students and talk to them about their research. My next duty is somewhat solemn. As most of you probably know, Dennis Smith, who's a longtime supporter of APPAM and has headed our management team forever, including this year. And he died quite suddenly, really. I talked to him one day, and I think 2 weeks later, he died of, I believe it was brain cancer anyway. He was in the hospital when I talked to him. And he thought it was a routine thing, and it turned out not to be too routine. But he was a wonderful member of APPAM, and I think the best way that we could honor him is to have a symposium in his name, and since he planned the symposium, it seemed especially appropriate, and we did that symposium yesterday, and it was a wonderful symposium, and I think that's a great way for APPAM to honor a member. The next thing that I have to do, that I get to do, is to give the Exemplar Award. This is kind of a big deal for APPAM. Let me tell you what the Exemplar Award stands for. We give it to someone who's made a major contribution to public policy by valuing the knowledge resident in academia and using research and analysis to craft innovation solutions to problems. And in addition, to draw attention to the important role individuals play in connecting research and policy in the policymaking process, also linking knowledge and discovery to practical applications. So maybe you will not be overly surprised that the person that's going to win this year is Becky Blank. So let me... Now, I have a great advantage of having worked with Becky over the years, so I know all kinds of stuff I can tell about her, most of which I won't. But my first thought introducing her was that I was going to cut her time to 10 minutes so that I would have 25 minutes that I could do a proper introduction, and that way I could mention half of the positions and honors she's received. But unfortunately, Jane is kind of a spoil sport. She said, no, that would not be appropriate for you to take all Becky's time, so I didn't. But let me just mention that Becky's directed policy centers at Northwestern Chicago, at the University of Michigan. She's taught at Princeton, Northwestern, MIT, Michigan. She was the Carr Fellow at Brookings, where her office was 2 doors away from mine. And that's the most I ever learned during the period of time she was at Brookings, because I constantly went by and talked to her. She lectured me. She served on the Council of Economic Advisors. She was a Deputy Secretary of Commerce, and not incidentally, I'll come back to this, head of the Census Bureau, and then as an Acting Secretary of Commerce, and now as a Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And in addition to many of the honors she's received, she's a past president of APPAM, which I think she will say is really the most formative experience that she had. I was going to say she has 2 great achievements that rise above all the others. I'm going to tell you about one of them. The other one, unfortunately, her husband is not here, Hans, who's an old friend of mine, and her great achievement regarding Hans is that he was quite a conservative Republican, and he was in the Reagan administration, and now he's a raging liberal. And I think this tells you some about both about her personality and her persuasiveness and her ability to threaten people. So here is how she operates. This is my second point. I think this really tells you what she's like. So in 1995, she was a member of the National Academy of Sciences panel that wrote that huge volume on what's wrong with the nation's official poverty measure and what we should do about it. Quite detailed, quite a remarkable report. 1995. So then in 2012, 100 years later, she is appointed the Undersecretary for Economic Affairs, and as part of that job, she's responsible for the Census Bureau. Now, I'm sure this is a total coincidence, but this gave her the opportunity to actually execute the plan that she had helped devise so many years before in 1995. And you guessed it, we wound up with a new measure of poverty that now I think almost everybody agrees is a much, much better measure than the official measure. And it has spawned additional measures, a wonderful measure at Columbia that a lot of people use now. So this is typical of the way Becky operates. She thinks of something, and she might have to wait a while, but she executed, and that's the essence of the Exemplar Award. And I think it illustrates the most important thing about Becky. She does not forget, and she always wins. Becky Blank. So now we have to pose for a picture.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Here, should I? You need to pose with me, Ron. Don't go too far.
More pictures? I thought she just took one.
There you go.
Okay,
All right.
good.
Thank you very much, Ron. Why don't I hand you this to go put it on my place back there? And
Okay, good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Stuff. Good.
All right. Ron, thank you very much. One gets a variety of honors if you stick around long enough, but I do have to say that this APPAM award has more meaning than virtually any other honor that I've received, in part because APPAM has been such an important part of my life for so long. I joined APPAM. It was a relatively new organization just as I was out of graduate school, and I got the David Kershaw Award sometime there in the early 90s, and I was on the Policy Council, and I was the president of APPAM. And I have a feeling that when you give me this award that you're sort of telling me it's time to move on. But I will say that this organization has meant a lot to me, and I know it's meant a lot to many, many scholars who care about the set of policy issues that APPAM has worked on. And it's just great to be here. I look out at the crowd, and it's all friends. And I should give a particular shout out to the University of Wisconsin people, because I know not everyone feels they need to show up when the chancellor comes to speak. Like they've heard enough from me in the last several years. So thank you guys for coming. Most of the presentations that I have given at APPAM, I think all of the presentations I've given at APPAM, have in one way or another related to economics and poverty and a set of issues that I've spent much of my career on. And so I'm going to do something entirely different this time because I can. And also because I will say I haven't been thinking a lot about those issues in the last couple of years. I've been doing other things. So I'm going to talk about public management. And I fear what I'll mainly prove to those of you who study public management that I haven't studied it. But I have done a lot of it. And let me talk a little bit about sort of some of the challenges of leading large public organizations. I've spent most of the last 7 years of my life doing that. I spent 4 years at the Department of Commerce, the first term of the Obama administration. I started as the Undersecretary for Economic Affairs, and among other things, the Census Bureau reports into that organization. And going through the 2010 census, which was a more than full-time job, was by far one of the most fascinating experiences of my life. I'll tell you a few stories from that. I then became Deputy Secretary. And those of you who don't know what titles mean in Washington, D.C., there's a very clearly graded title system that unless you live there, you wouldn't know this. The Deputy Secretary is the number 2 in the department. And it's the person who is basically the chief operating officer, the person who's in charge of strategic planning, operations, implementation, making the place actually move forward on the policies it's supposed to be running. And then while I was deputy secretary, for a variety of somewhat unexpected instances, I had the honor of being acting secretary for about 14 months. So, I mean, it was a time period in which there was zero disagreement whatsoever between the 2 top people in the department, because the deputy secretary and the acting secretary never had an argument, which does have its advantages. Now, those of you who don't know much about the Department of Commerce, which I suspect is large numbers of people in this room, might have heard at the Republican debates, I think it was Ted Cruz who proposed eliminating the Department of Commerce. And let me just tell you what you would get rid of if you eliminated the Department of Commerce. We would have no more weather service, weather forecasts, or weather data, because NOAA does all of that in the Department of Commerce. We would have no economic or social data. Not just would we lose the census data, all the GDP and price numbers, we'd lose all the unemployment numbers as well, because even though those are reported by BLS, the work on that is done by census. We would, and that's a particular problem because it turns out the decennial census is in the Constitution. So you'd have to amend the Constitution if you're going to get rid of the census. You would have no patents, no patent office, no patent enforcement, and you'd get rid of the National Institute for Standards and Technology, which this crowd doesn't interact with much, but is absolutely central to manufacturing in this country, and which would cause quite a firestorm among a number of industries. Those are just some of the agencies there. It's just a fascinating agency. It's an economics agency. It's a science agency. Being there was great fun. So I spent 4 years doing that. And then for the last 2.5 years, I've been the chancellor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, Wisconsin. That's actually a slightly smaller organization. Commerce is about a $10 billion budget. Madison is just under a $4 billion budget. But we have a lot more people. We have 43,000 students and 22,000 employees in Madison. So having done those 2 things for a lot of the last 7 years, as I say, I've not been doing a lot of economic theory or doing very much with CPS data, but I have spent a lot of time thinking about the challenges facing big public organizations. And I should say about the University of Wisconsin, we're a state agency. Unlike many universities, I'm actually a senior state official. And so, you know, the University of Wisconsin-Madison is a big state public agency. Commerce is actually obviously a big federal public agency. These sorts of public institutions are constantly under attack these days. You constantly hear that the employees are not doing their job and aren't very good. Tell me one private sector company where their board of governors, their governing body, is always talking about how bad the employees are. You know, that just doesn't happen. That's a real problem inside an agency where the public, they're constantly being told by the people who run their budgets that they're not doing a good job. The budgets are constantly under attack. Many of you know that we got a big budget cut at the University of Wisconsin this last year. While in the Department of Commerce, our budget was sort of slowly declining with the rest of the federal budget. We did not have a government shutdown while I was there. We have had since. But while I was there, we walked up to 2 government shutdowns. We spent 2 to 3 months preparing for those shutdowns. One of them got resolved, I think, at 11:59, right before we were supposed to implement. And I can promise you there is no way that is more effective to waste time, energy, and money inside of a government bureaucracy than to prepare to shut down and then, except maybe shutting down and not do so. It's a wonderful way to make government agencies ineffective. You know what's happening to public budgets everywhere. So in addition to employees being under attack and budgets being under attack, the mission is also regularly under attack. You know what's being said about higher education. We shouldn't be running humanities departments. We can't resolve some of the problems we have. Government bureaucracy can't do anything useful. If we just got rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, we could cut your price in half. And whatever you do, it's too expensive. But what I find really particularly striking in the midst of those attacks is everyone at the same time is coming to us and asking us to do more. And this was true in commerce, and it's also true at the university where there's always things people want that you aren't currently doing that they think would be a great idea. And it's sometimes even the same people who tell you your budget is too large and you need to cut things, who are at the same time saying, why don't you serve more people? Why don't you take on this whole job that you aren't doing right now? And so the demand for services is not down. And it's what makes these budget cuts particularly difficult. We're not in a recession in terms of higher education. Demand is not declining. In fact, demand is going up. But at the same time, the public response that you need to cut back on budgets and on prices and on what you're doing it's a very interesting disconnect. So let me talk about 3 of the major